That movie sucked.
I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.
Hello and welcome to Content and Capable, where I try to figure out what it really means to adult. Today I spoke to Ryan Gold, who is a meteorologist, about his work and the kind of interesting things that he does working in broadcast meteorology. Welcome to Content and Capable. Hello, Ryan. It's nice to chat to you in voice.
Yeah, it's great to hear from you too. Always love hearing a great accent, and you've got a great one, I gotta say.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't think my accent is very true blue Aussie, but every time I speak to someone new, they always make a comment about it. So I must be doing something right.
Yeah, you must be.
What's been some adulting that you've been doing recently?
I've gone to the doctor, finally, by myself for the first time in around 2 years. And it's not that I didn't do it because I couldn't adult. It was more so that I didn't do it because I didn't even have health insurance where I was before. But now I'm actually here, and I'm back, interestingly enough, on my parents' health insurance. So I guess I'm not even fully adulting, but the adulting thing I say is I did actually go to the doctor. So I'm glad about that. I finally got something done, and I'm actually going to be mentoring somebody else now at my work, who's a high school senior. So I mean, if you're not an adulting, you can't really mentor, at least in my opinion. So I must be doing something. Much like you with your accent, I must be doing something right.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I whenever I speak to Americans, it's the first thing they mention is health, and I think no matter what kind of health insurance you're on, if you're on health insurance at all, I think that's a win.
Yeah, honestly, at this place, at this point.
Yeah, I think that's it's definitely awesome, and you're mentoring someone. In terms of they want to be, they want to go into your field of work?
Yeah, so apparently what they did, what the email said anyway, was that she wanted to get into meteorology specifically, and so she just kind of asked the first, and since the station that I work for in Georgia here is like the number one in the entire market, which is around like, oh God, I want to say like 50-ish miles in a circle, essentially, from the point where I am, which is Augusta, Georgia. And so she's like, hey, let's just see what happens here. And I think she wants to do stuff with TV too. She was mentioning using the green screen and everything. But honestly, I've done a lot of quote unquote teaching before, but I'm sitting here trying to think up of what to really talk with her about. And I don't really know what she wants specifically from me. So hopefully I'll be able to figure everything out for her. But honestly, I think that it's going to be a pretty fun time either way. So.
Is that like a typical way you get into meteorology, or is there a bit more of a formal approach?
It's more, I mean, you can pretty much enter anything through any way if you've got the right connections. I mean, even in like the film industry, you know somebody who's pretty high up in there, you'll be able to get in. But I feel like internships and things like this is definitely the place to start. It's not how I started, and I kind of regret that, honestly. Internships are such an easy way to find out if you actually like doing what you do, first of all, and then second of all, it's a great way of actually knowing what you should be doing in that as well. And I didn't really have that to start with. I just kind of jumped right in college. So, I mean, good on her for wanting to make a step forward. I hope she chose the right person to learn from.
Yeah, it's always a little stressful. It's like, am I putting the best image out there? And I've definitely had people who've had to either learn or I've been trained or currently at university, I run some clubs and do some work with the university with some mentorship programs. And I always feel like, am I doing like the best job I possibly can? Am I going to turn them away or make them hate it? Or I'm always a little terrified about that. But then you mentioned that you haven't gone into, like, you didn't get into meteorology the same way that, through internships and bits and pieces. So how did you get into meteorology?
So interestingly enough, I wanted to be a paleontologist at first, and I actually worked at the Natural History Museum in Philadelphia where I grew up. And while I did love the stuff and I loved everything about it, it just was not for me. The amount of money that they were making was basically pennies, and you'd have to really like just basically be a professor if you wanted to make any money in the field, or go into like working for an oil company where you could find the oil and be like, hey, drill here. You get like $200,000 a year, I saw with that. But that's not really what I want to do with paleontology. I'm more into like the dinosaur aspect of it. So I was just kind of sitting around one day, and my mom was like, so what are you going to go into college for? And I'm just like, well, I don't really know, honestly. So she's like, well, you love weather. You've always loved weather. And I'm like, that is true. I am super into weather. And she's like, well, you also love acting too. And I was a big theater kid in high school and college as well. And eventually in college, yeah, but at the time I was in high school. And she was just like, how about you just combine them together? And I'm like, you know what? That sounds like a great idea. And I just jumped right into it in college. I was lucky enough to get into Penn State, which was, at least at the time, I think it still is now, the number one school for meteorology in the country. Basically, almost everything big kind of was there. AccuWeather, I don't know if you've heard of it out there in Australia, but
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was invented at Penn State, and its headquarters is in that same city area. So it was great for it, and honestly, they had so many connections at Penn State that it spreads across the entire country. So I feel like you do have like a little leg up if you end up going to Penn State for it. But other people that I've met that went to other schools, you're just as good as us on air and everything. So it's really, if you really want to do it, you can do it. Doesn't matter where you go to school for it. But I just chose Penn State since it was closest, and basically my entire family went there as well. So I'm like, you know what? Two birds. Let's do it.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely feel almost the same. I'm going into journalism. A lot of it is quite internship heavy at the moment. Unpaid internshipping as well, which I, as a musician as well, I really don't like not being paid for the work I do. It's just going to be a sacrifice I have to make for the moment. But like it was, yeah. The whole, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I've been very lucky. I've gotten some lucky breaks and kind of accidentally knowing people who are quite high up in areas of journalism that I've wanted to work in. But yeah, it's interesting to see that the world of meteorology is almost the same as the world of journalism, which, to be honest, isn't very far apart. I'm interested to know. My brother is doing a science degree at the moment, and he was talking about what are the possible options with the kind of degree that he's doing. And he mentioned meteorology, and I was intrigued. To get into meteorology, is there anything particular you have to study?
Oh yeah, you gotta study all kinds of aspects of science. I remember it was around, I think it's been 2 years since I graduated, but my last year was mostly just forecasting. But before that, you've got to do Calc 3 is one of the higher calcs that you've got to get done. Differential equations you've got to know. Integrating and differentiating equations is big in most aspects of science, I would say. But it got really high up there. We got 400 level science classes. Thermodynamics, atmospheric dynamics, fluid dynamics, pretty much all the dynamics that you could possibly want. It's basically comparable to an engineering degree. I wouldn't say it's 100% like it, because I don't want anybody with an engineering degree to come at me. But I think it is. I think it is fairly high, at least science based, and it could be on par with engineers. But when you kind of focus up on the communications aspect, that's when it changes, at least from a broadcast meteorology perspective. But you still got to know all the science about why things happen, or else you're basically, anybody can do weather at that point. It's just, if you know what you're talking about, that makes it, you have a leg up on everybody else. So, I mean, honestly, it's basically a fantastic science class, don't get me wrong. But if you really want to go into broadcasting, it might not be exactly for you. But there are people who actually do those as well, who don't have to do the science part and they just go flat in with the communication aspect of it. And a lot sometimes they're not looked on really well in the community, but you know, so long as you know the basic science of it, it's great to do. But you have to do some really intense classes. I had to retake a few classes actually. Thermodynamics I had to retake. I had to retake. Oh gosh, I can't even remember which classes I retook at that point, which tells you how much I paid attention, obviously, in school for that then.
Yeah, I definitely in high school science definitely brushed on all those topics. The idea we don't separate our maths; it's just maths. So we did calculus all the way through till differentiation and integration, but and the same with the science as well. Science was separated into your physics, chemistry, biology, and they did earth science at my school, which not all schools do. But we definitely did, your thermodynamics and a whole bunch of other bits and pieces. It was very interesting. I almost went into a science degree myself, but the science communication aspect and being like a front-facing kind of, this is what's being developed in the science, or even in your case, showcasing, the research that you guys do on a daily basis as meteorologists, I think is just amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty insane when you try to kind of condense all the science into just what's consumable to people, just watching in the daily basis, like Joe Schmo, who's just kind of flipping channels and it's like, oh wow, there's a hurricane coming, and so we're trying to look at all the science, in our office and going through and writing down notes and doing this and doing that, and then finally having to kind of condense everything, throw out all the actual science words, which sometimes I do actually leave in my forecasts and my broadcasts because sometimes people actually like to hear some of the words, but every time that you say a word that's super big and scientific, you have to explain it, whether or not the people that are at home or even listening or maybe they even know the word, but you still have to do it, and it really takes up a lot of time. You only get like 3-4 minutes, maybe 2:45 to actually say everything that you've been forecasting. So sometimes things just have to
Yeah.
get removed, and then there's sometimes really big pieces of explanation that have to be left out because you've got to, you got to get to the 10-day forecast or the 7-day forecast to show everybody what's going on for the week. But if we've got something bubbling up in the tropics, you can't. It's like, hey, this looks like pretty bad. We'll get back to it, and it's like you want to talk about it so much more, but you can't because you have to move on. So it's kind of tough trying to get rid of all the gunk. But honestly, like
Yeah.
it's still a really fun experience, at least for me, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, it's the same. I think it's very much the same in journalism as well. There's points where I've got a deadline coming up, and there's so much more context that I could give that probably would make an explanation so much more well-rounded. But at the same time, I'm limited by the amount of seconds I've got or the amount of words I've got. Do you prefer working in that kind of time restricted environment, or would you prefer to like sit and be able to like properly explain everything to someone?
I mean, I would love to properly explain almost everything to everyone, but eventually people are going to get bored. Everybody has a short attention span. They all do. You don't have to have ADHD to have a bad one, which I have. You don't have to have ADHD to have a bad attention span, and especially when it comes to TV, because people go to TV to be entertained while being informed, especially if you go to news. So you have to be at least somewhat, stopping. So I kind of like having the deadline because as a procrastinator, also, I need to be able to actually get everything out because I could spend, a full minute on a lot of the graphics that I end up showing, but we only have 3 minutes total, which is great because if I had all that time, it could easily become 10 minutes of just me standing in front of you talking endlessly. And I know I don't
Yeah.
want that, and I don't think anybody else really wants that either. But I can do it, and that's the good part of the deadline.
Yes. No, I definitely think that that's awesome. And like when someone else is setting that deadline and enforcing that deadline, it just makes it so much easier to adhere to it as well, which yeah, I know I definitely appreciate.
I mean, honestly, even in college, I loved having a deadline because I would never get anything done if I didn't, and I feel like that might be the case for a lot of people. But having a deadline really helps, at least me. So, yeah,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you prefer? Have you worked in radio or other forms of meteorology forecasting work?
So I have done radio, but at this point, radio is just like a byproduct of the current industry that I'm in, which is basically, of course, like it's all part of broadcast, but
Yeah,
since TV has dominated and now soon, live streaming over the internet, it's going to be, I mean, it's already here, but it's getting even more ground.
yeah,
It's basically all the same kind of stuff, just done in a different medium. So there's really no big, huge differences between them all, which is great because you don't really have to change or kind of do anything different than you normally would, which is what you really want to have,
yeah,
especially in a career, because the best is not having to change that much, but changing a little bit is always great, which is the problem at a lot of these TV stations, and I think it might be an issue at mine as well, is that they don't really agree with the whole internet thing. For some reason, I think a lot of the people that I work with, they're a little older, but they still are like anti-internet and anti-digital, which is insane because if you are still, not believing that internet's going to become this big thing, you gotta step off. And it's basically a joke is that we all think that some of the people in charge of our station, only our station in particular, are just completely like out of it when it comes to figuring out
yeah,
what to be doing. And they're like, oh yeah, no, digital's not that big. We're gonna focus and heavily invest in on-air broadcasting, which is working for them now, but it's not going to be working for them, maybe in 10, 20 years. So everybody needs to be ready to change at least a little bit more. But at least the same
yeah,
kind of thing is, radio, internet, social media, live streams, now TikTok. A lot of meteorologists and new journalists are getting into TikTok now as well. Um, so of course, things are changing, but it's all still kind of the same flavor, the same bowl of soup. It's just different pieces in it.
yeah. I definitely find that very interesting. I've got a journalism professor at the moment. He's actually from America. He was based over in Rhode Island for a long time, and ran a very successful journalism school over there. He's come here to Australia, and he's teaching us here, and it's been amazing to see how adaptive he is to new technologies and how willing he is to give everything new a go. He's kind of he's not like super high up, which gives him like the freedom to be able to like innovate a little bit more and experiment. And he's recently gotten really into Instagram and just posting a whole bunch of stuff to Instagram to like appeal to a younger audience. And it's been great because it means it's really showing us what works and allowing us to experiment with what works and what doesn't work on Instagram and social media platforms like that. But I was amazed by like the resourcefulness that he has around, just what can I do with what's in front of me right now to make awesome content. But yeah, I actually follow quite a few American meteorologists on TikTok. I find them quite fascinating. It kind of blends into my fascination with science communication. But every now and then they mention who, from my understanding, America's got very very strict rules about predicting weather. What are those kind of rules?
Uh, Very strict rules for predicting weather. I mean, since I'm not in Australia, I really don't know, or I'm not in any other countries. So I was taught all the rules. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. Do you have any more elaboration?
Um, I'm trying to think. There was at one point I was watching a video by just a general journalist, and
Right.
they were asked why they weren't reporting on the weather. I think they're talking about Hurricane Ida as it was coming through New and around New Orleans there. But they turned around and they said, I'm gonna let someone else, take over this particular
Oh,
video to like explain because they're a
okay.
proper meteorologist.
Yeah, okay. So that's what you mean. Yeah, absolutely. People, I mean, when it comes to actual weather and stuff, let's just, let's take last year for example. So I started at my current station in around August, which is, I would say, it's pretty much the midpoint of hurricane season. It starts in June, ends in November, so it's basically the midpoint. And a couple of months later, we had Hurricane Sally come through.
Mm.
And the thing about hurricanes is that, they're very tricky to predict, especially pathway. And when it actually comes through an area, that's when it's the hardest to predict because you never know what a hurricane's going to do. You don't know if it's going to be a very wind heavy, rain heavy, lightning heavy, maybe tornado heavy kind of event. Like what just
Hmm.
we didn't I would expect not a lot of meteorologists to really think that the remnants of Ida from the last big storm would have impacted the Northeast as much as it did. Honestly,
Yeah.
it was coming through fairly strong. Of course, it was a Category 5. It was or a Category 4. It was actually no, I think it was a 5. Oh, it's so early over here, I don't remember. But the point is, it was one of the stronger storms to actually come through the area, harder than Katrina was, at least, which was the last storm that came through. And normally, once a
Hmm.
tornado, once a hurricane actually makes landfall, it loses so much of its power and it becomes disorganized, and it eventually just becomes an ordinary low pressure system with fronts and everything like you typically see from a normal system that just comes across the area.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, low pressure systems, they're still strong. They're still cyclones, so they're still going to be giving a
Yeah.
lot of storms and everything. But Ida was basically at category 5 or 4, or maybe even like a 3 power as it was dying and becoming remnants, as we call them, as they passed
Hmm.
through, New York and everything else. So they got flooded. My family was in major flood zones. Philadelphia has an expressway that goes like quote unquote underneath the city and like through the city, and that became basically like a canal in Venice. It was completely full of water, and no one
Yeah.
really expected something like that to happen. So having journalists and everything and just kind of reporters talk about those things, which they ended up doing for Sally when I was there. It's not always great
Hmm.
to have. So they're normally on the people aspect of those kinds of storms, while meteorologists, they're supposed to be the ones that talk about the actual weather and science behind the storm. So if you have somebody who's not a meteorologist trying to talk about, you know, weather and everything, it's not always looked on in the highest of light. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, you can be a weather person, you can be a meteorologist on the TV, but you're not really a meteorologist unless you've got that degree or at least some
Hmm.
science background and know what's going on like inside of a storm and know how they form and everything, because anybody can really talk about what they can. Anybody can go on like National Weather Service, write down what they see and then just repeat everything that they saw, but it takes a meteorologist to know why it does that and explain why it does that. And that's kind of why,
Hmm.
and that's kind of, I mean, like a rule, quote unquote. It's not really a rule, but it's definitely frowned upon if somebody who doesn't know weather tries to talk about weather. So you're going to want to give
Wow.
your
Yeah.
TikTok to somebody who knows what they're talking about, because you don't want to say, especially in journalism, you definitely don't want to say something wrong. And you
Yeah.
can't say something wrong, and you have plausible deniability if you give it to somebody else who at least knows somewhat what they're talking about.
Yeah. No, 100%. I like. And I always forget every time I speak to an American, which is I should have learnt my lesson after 6 months of of communicating with people who live in America. But everything's like so separated as well. We have like a proper, really well funded National Weather Service, which is called the Bureau of Meteorology here, and they do every prediction and every bit of mapping. If you need to know the weather, you actually go to their website. You don't go to the news, you go to their website for their predictions, because that's where our reliable source of weather information comes from. And radio stations, television stations, newspapers even just regurgitate what's coming out of the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. government-funded organization, and it's quite handy, and gotten a lot better over the years as well. You're talking about Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Sandy. We do pretty much the same for cyclones here. I live in Queensland, which was quite famous for being hit by cyclones in 2011. The city in which I'm actually sitting in was underwater for a while, as a cyclone hit far south enough to just keep on heading south and hitting us. We had things like, there was a huge cyclone that hit up in the north of Australia, and it basically decimated the capital city for the Northern Territory. But it's always, as soon as we see storm clouds, or it even gets to summer here, I'm checking the weather daily, going, are we predicting a storm this afternoon? What's it going to look like? Is it going to be severe? Do we need to pick up things from the backyard so they don't fly away in the wind, or, et cetera, et cetera. And this rant basically is, wow, I definitely think that, no, I don't think we have a huge amount of meteorologists who work in newsrooms now that I think about it.
Yeah, so it's very different because here, like, it's basically, I mean, anybody can really look it up. Most people, I would assume at this point, would use their weather app just to kind of see the general day to day. But like, you have to go online and go actual searching for hurricane news. But like you mentioned, our National Weather Service also covers, all hurricane tracks and watches and warnings when, there's a severe thunderstorm coming through, or there's going to be a flood watch. So that we actually pretty much do just kind of regurgitate exactly what it is, because while we do want to have our own separate kind of forecasts for things, and while the hurricane service, like the National Weather Service, will have a tracks for a hurricane, you might be able to, like, well, this is what we're thinking, but this is what they're thinking, but this is kind of like what we're thinking. And typically, it's normally the same anyway, because we're all looking at the same kind of models for it. But honestly, at least when it comes to day-to-day forecasts, you always have somebody there. And I feel like most of the things that people come on to actually watch the Weather Channel, or not the Weather Channel, but your news organization for the weather, is mostly for just is our storms coming, like you kind of mentioned, are storms coming, where will they be, when will they be? But honestly, I mean, having like that centralized, we've been having meteorologists here forever, so it's interesting hearing that you guys really just don't have them in the newsroom. I know not to go to Australia to work there.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely like still weather presenters.
Oh.
I wouldn't be surprised if they've got meteorology backgrounds,
Right.
but definitely, like, the more I think about it, the more I go, like, I work at a radio station at the moment, and we just take our report straight from the Bureau of Meteorology. And the other thing is, from a very young age, I learned how to read the radar. So the Bureau of Meteorology releases their rain radar. And so you can read that, and you can kind of look at it and predict how far away a storm is, the movement, how severe it's going to be. Most of the time you can kind of so a lot of the times in summer, we'll like see thunder and lightning, and we'll go, okay, yep, cool. And then check to see, is it going to hit us? Is it going to avoid us? A lot of the time, unfortunately, it avoids us. I think it's cool to watch a storm. But it's very interesting that, to check, how close away things are and what the severity is. People go straight to the news. I suppose that's what the news is for.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting a lot less. People are not really going as much anymore now. They all go for their phones, and I honestly, or they just just like wing it. It's like, we're in a very heavy thunderstorm area like Texas or Georgia. It's gonna thunderstorm. It's gonna happen. I'm just gonna move on. But when it comes to like actual like hurricane stuff, then things change. But I mean, there's always a need for local weather. I'm not just saying that because I want to keep a job, but it's like there's always a need for that local weather, because you need to have somebody really explaining what's going on here. And not a lot of people really watch the news for weather anymore. But honestly, like, we gotta just do more, more live streams and get it out there. But
Yeah.
it's really not that hard to read a radar. If you look at it enough times, like if you just look at a radar once, yeah, it's gonna look intimidating. But if you keep going back to it, I know I'm a meteorologist, like I was trained to really look at it, but it's not as hard as you think. So if you actually want to, you know, learn how to read radar, basically just kind of looking at it, looking at the way things move, and then just judging time. And you can always just easily
Hmm.
kind of look at it and kind of like judge it with your fingers, and then like get a stopwatch, if you really care. But it's a good
Yeah.
judge. It's really not that hard to read radar. It's more so reading weather models that are getting a little bit tougher, especially when it comes to like text-based models. Those are extremely complicated to read because they're just a bunch of words and letters all at once. And I remember when I was learning how to look at them before, even before I was learning how to, and I would just look at them. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna bother reading that. I'm just gonna move on, or I'm just not even gonna
Mm.
bother trying to know what the weather is. I'll wing it.
No, yeah, it's definitely very. I definitely think that it's not a particularly hard skill, but do you do then like you have a look at like more long term, like how's the weather going to play out in weeks, months, years,
So basically,
kind of predictions?
yeah, basically
Sorry.
the so as a working in basically just day to day kind of I go away and I forecast, then I leave and then I present it and leave. You really can't go that far out. Honestly, models they've gotten a lot more accurate and they're way better than they used to be. But even that being said, really anything more than like 5 days out is really kind of a toss up because things are changed. Like weather
Mm.
changes so quickly. So even that 5 days is it. Like basically, I would say that models are extremely accurate, probably like 90% to 100% accurate. I would say about 2 days, like 48 hours, maybe even 56 hours. I would say based on some of the
Mm.
models that we use, we go out like 56 hours. Those are like going to be the most accurate, and most of the time I would say around 90% of the time they're 100% accurate. 90% of the time 100%
Yeah.
accurate. But honestly, like the further out you get to like 10-day forecasts, honestly, they're basically they're almost worthless, basically just kind of showing, just for like looks. They've got a great
Mm.
idea. You look at a 10-day forecast, you're gonna be like, okay, so I can expect it's generally gonna be, kind of sunny. But even then, things will change so quickly. Like there's so many times that we'll have, 10 days out, complete sunshine, and then like in maybe 2, 3 days, we're gonna change whatever that day was to stormy and rainy. Like things pop up out of nowhere all the time. So really having
Yeah.
anything more than 5 days out is basically a toss up because things change so quickly in our field that just having that there is kind of just for looks. Honestly, like even a 7 day forecast is kind of pushing it, but honestly, but AccuWeather
Yeah.
has like a 90-day, so that's basically just they're basically just closing their eyes and throwing a dart at a board, and it's like 90
Hmm.
degrees and sunny sounds good. It's really basically a toss up. So pretty much anything, but then you've got like you said, years and stuff. There are still climatologists out there, which is a little different than meteorologists because they look at trends and then just see how trends have
Mm.
been changing over the years, and then they make predictions based on that, which is like kind of how you get hurricane season predictions and everything. And I'm pretty sure right
Yeah.
now we only had like we have 17 current tropical depressions that had formed in the Atlantic, and I'm pretty sure by this time last year we had closer to 20. So things, and the season's not over yet, and it's going to get even
Yeah.
crazier as you get into October or November. But we're approaching the end of the hurricane season, and they predicted that this year was going to be the same, if not worse, than last year. So it still remains to be seen. Honestly, we haven't had that many major
Mm.
hurricanes coming through. Ida was really the only biggest one. I think we've had maybe like 4 major hurricanes total, with only one making landfall. So I'm pretty sure by this point last year we had way more. I'm not trying to say that we want more, by any means, but that's the kind of the thing that's been going on. Forecasts and predictions
It's
long term are not
yeah.
always great,
Sometimes it's a bit more all about the drama.
especially in the news industry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, we. It's interesting. I'm a bit of a military brat, so I've got my father works in the military, and so oftentimes when like severe flooding happens, or even to an extent bushfires recently, the army gets called up to go and assist the state emergency service and the police and the fire brigade to, just give some extra manpower, bits and pieces. And so they were on the ground when we had our big floods here in Brisbane. And anyone who lives in Brisbane knows that of the 2011 floods, they're quite famous in recent memory. But it's very interesting that my dad made a comment to me the other day, and he goes, no one is like really, oftentimes you'll see around this time of year talking about the storm season, as we head into storm season and the possibility of a couple of cyclones hanging around. And my dad turned around to me and said, it's been deathly quiet about storms, so I reckon we'll get a big one this year. So the current prediction from the layman is that he reckons that there's going to be some big storms, and I take everything people say with a grain of salt, but it's very interesting to see even like common people have like some very strong opinions about the weather. Do you find that sometimes you have to like negotiate these ideas and opinions to kind of go, well, actually, it's better in this direction, or you're not actually quite right there?
Honestly, being in the news industry, you're gonna get your share of people trying to give you their 2 cents on every single thing that happens. And honestly, unless they actually have weather experience, I'm not going to listen to what they have to say. I'll stand there and I'll smile and I'll nod, but I'm not going to really, actually take heart of what they say. Most of the time, I'll probably end up just zoning out. But I'm still going to put on a happy face and be like, yeah, all right, yeah. Because I've been dealing with all kinds of crazy, people. You're going to get that in everything. You're going to get, the Karens of the world thinking that they know how to do your job better than you do. And they're going to be all like, yeah, one of the biggest things I get, besides it would be great to have, a job where you're only right 50% of the time. So sick of that. My God, get a better joke already. I've heard it 8 million times already. It's the thing I hear the most. It's like, oh, I feel something in my knees. So, we're going to get some rain and some snow coming. And it's like, well, no. I mean, the only scientifically speaking, the reason that they feel that is most likely due to the fact that the pressure outside is lowering. But you don't really get that until the storm's actually there, because the low pressure is what's making the thing happen. Because with low pressure, you get lift, and lift is what creates the rain and the snow and everything else. So it's like you can't be feeling it yet. It's just cold. Yeah, it's probably going to snow because it's cold. That's great forecast, Karen. It's but
Yeah.
we get people trying to tell us, and frankly, they don't do it as often as you'd think. It's more so like if you're just kind of like out and about in the day, they might come up to you and be like, hey, is it going to do this? Is it going to do that? And you're like, no, yeah, this and that. And it's like, well, it's like, well, and that's when I start zoning out once they go on their, oh, well, I think kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, great job.
It reminds me of there's a game show. I don't know whether you've heard of College Humor.
Oh, yeah, I have.
But yeah, I love their comedy, and they've got a game show on their subscription service. So I haven't watched much of it at all, really, just kind of clips, but called Actually, and that definitely feels like something someone would say.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's going to be this way.
Yeah, no, and they always have their 2 cents. So whenever you're in an industry where people are watching and everything, they're gonna also comment on things. And I didn't really, I that wasn't really something that I thought about happening, but I've gotten so many viewer complaints about just the most ridiculous things, and they call me the most ridiculous stuff. In my old station, I got called a clown multiple times because I would use my arms too much. And it's like, well, I got to point to things. I'm not just going to talk about it. So like my arms, they consider flailing. They've used, and then it's like you need to stop doing this. You need to stop doing that. And it's like, I don't really do this. And it's like I do this for just general everybody. I'm not going to change what I do for you, man. And then this other guy at the station that I work at now just emailed me, and he called me a Poindexter. Okay, I wear glasses. And that's basically my personality is very, geeky, dorky kind of person anyway. So, I'm 100% a
Yeah.
Poindexter. Yeah. Like, I'm not even gonna, but like, nobody's used that since like the 1950s. So it tells you how
Hmm.
old the people that are watching are actually. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's like, do you have any like tips? You want any, is it just gonna be Poindexter? Are you gonna actually like, is there anything you want me to stop doing? I don't remember
Yeah.
exactly what it was he was complaining about at this point because I basically just laugh at every viewer complaint and then I delete it, or I'll take a picture of it, show people, show my friends,
Hmm.
and then delete it. So for all you out there that complain to your local news people, we laugh at you more than we actually are taking offense to what you say.
And admittedly, journalists laugh too.
Yeah, honestly, how can you?
We're sorry, continue.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
it's no, no, yeah. Basically, meteorologists and journalists, we're the same kind. We're all in news together, and so like we're all getting the same stuff. But journalists, I mean, my friends
Mm.
in the field, especially women in the field, it's like a harassing central out here, and it's really disgusting. And they get harassed by not only just guys and older people that are watching, but I had this one friend who just her dresses that she had, they showed a bit of cleavage. It's not a big deal.
Hmm.
People have boobs. Cleavage is going to be a thing.
Yeah.
You know, and this woman, her name was Patricia, and we always would laugh because our inside joke was that Patricia was going to come after everyone for everything that they have. And
Hmm.
my friend Taylor, she basically would just at this time, this in particular time, she was like just looking through the news. It was the noon show. Everything was fine. We were just having our normal thing. Everything was great. And here come the flooding of comments from Patricia herself to the direct line of the station, being like, "Oh, this news anchor needs to stop showing so much cleavage. Oh my God, it's so inappropriate." And it's like, really? And it was funny because we were laughing at it, of course, and then
Hmm.
later on after the show, we were just kind of hanging around and everything, talking to everybody else, all the other reporters and the news director and everybody around us, talking about that individual time. We were all sharing stories about that kind of thing in particular, and we all look at our emails because another email came through with Patricia being, and I quote, "So is that news girl still going to be showing off that cleavage?" And it's like, yes, yes. In fact,
Oh.
she's going to show even more to spite you. Is basically what it was, and
Yeah.
it's basically it's disgusting what a lot of other people say. I'm not even going to get into what some of the guys have said to her that we've
Yeah.
seen. Those are less laughable and more okay. Let's block you and just change your name and
Mm.
kind of move away.
Yeah.
Which is it's really upsetting that's what they have to
Yeah.
deal with in this industry. Almost every industry, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of terrible. And the big thing at the moment here in Australia is clothing. There was this one journalist. I think she was a foreign correspondent, Australian foreign correspondent, and there was some sort of, I think it was the Paris attacks a couple of years ago, and somehow she was in the right place at the right time, but wasn't like didn't have like everything prepared, and obviously that happened very suddenly, and she got sent there. And so she wore this same jacket like, I don't know, 6 or 7 days in a row. And so people started making complaints. They're like, why is this woman, wearing the same jacket? And everyone, anyone with any sort of sense really turned around and go, you have to realize that the news is not the pretty face in front of you. The news is what's happening and what they're describing to you. And, we uh, I get very frustrated at the petty nature of people sometimes when they can't see beyond what is right in front of them, and look towards the bigger picture. And even things like climate change or beyond a 7 day forecast. We can't do more than 7 days because as you said before, it's not realistic to predict that far.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy how picky people are, especially where it comes to appearance and everything. It's like, yeah, we're of course in front of you and everything, and it's just not realistic to have these huge expectations of people. You can have like an idea of what your kind of whether person or your journalist should look like and should do and everything. But it's
Hmm.
not even a should kind of thing because anyone can really take. It's more about can they tell the story and the information that you need to know in a great way. And if they can,
Yeah.
then that's all that should really matter. It shouldn't matter if she's wearing the same jacket she wore yesterday. This is an intense situation. You should be focusing on the fact that Paris just had, a terrorist attack. Don't focus on the fact that, she's wearing the jacket again. And that's the other thing is that, it just should not matter, what a person wears. It should be a nice presentation, but they are, and the journalists and the meteorologists, they are the the gatekeepers of the knowledge and the information that you need to have. They're not the thing that you're supposed to be, looking at. You're supposed to be looking at them, of course, to get the intro and be like, kind of like let in the door. But then you're supposed to go and actually look at the information and kind of think things for yourself. And don't let anyone tell you, what to think for it. I mean, there's of course when I guess it's a little different for weather because like you need to have the weather person. Like, don't actually think you can predict on your own. Like, if you can, great. If you've got the training, you train. Like, it's great. But like when it comes to like political things and everything, have an opinion for yourself, which is something that you need to, just start having in general. Don't just let somebody tell you what to think. And that's really what a journalist's job is supposed to be. Is they're supposed to be unbiased, and they're supposed to let you know, what to do. Of course, you're in the industry. They're supposed to let you know what's going on, and then you kind of figure out everything else from there. And it shouldn't matter, if somebody wears the same dress or the same jacket, right, like a day after, especially when it comes to breaking news and everything. Most of the time, most of the time for weather, it's hot in our offices, so we're taking our jackets off, we're rolling up our sleeves, and most severe weather things, they happen at a moment's notice. They happen, we're watching it in general, but there's a lot of storms that I could be watching that I'm sitting there thinking, why the hell are they really making this, a severe thunderstorm? It's got a great core of heavy rain and hail. There's a lot of lightning, heavy wind associated with it. They should be marking this as a severe thunderstorm, but not all the time because we have to wait for the National Weather Service to actually issue those warnings for like tornado warnings and thunderstorm warnings. But we can mention, like this is pretty strong, even though they haven't made this a severe thunderstorm warning, you gotta, so we're always kind of just like jumping up and running over to the green screen. It doesn't really matter what we're wearing, and nobody really comments on that either at the time. So it should really be the same for, break like a terrorist attack or anything like breaking newsworthy should be taken with the same kind of idea as severe weather. And you're not going to complain about your local weatherman having his sleeves rolled up and his jacket not on because of this thunderstorm or a tornado. But like, so you shouldn't consider like your local journalist, bad. You shouldn't complain about it just because her jacket's the same thing that she wore, like, or even they have their jacket off talking about the situation. Yeah, you got to look professional, but as long as you have a good enough idea, like, or a good enough like kind of suit on, you're not just wearing, like a t-shirt and jeans, it's still going to be good enough. And people, it really is crazy how picky people can get.
Oh yeah, 100%. And like you mentioned gatekeeping before, and I've been thinking about it. I've been doing a couple ethics classes this semester and a couple previously, and I always come back to this idea that people who work in the news are sort of gatekeepers, and gatekeeping has this like dirty word, a dirty like association to it. People don't like talking about it, but by gatekeeping is a good thing sometimes because, as I found out through some research the other day, when I was trying to justify an argument, information overload is a very serious thing, and you start like disconnecting. You don't see that important information. We've seen it in COVID. I've definitely seen it being reflected in severe weather events. People who have been following the news really hard at the start and then lost complete interest towards the end, when things might be getting worse or could be getting worse for them. And so it's very fascinating to see the important work that people like journalists and meteorologists do, filtering out that unnecessary information to just give that 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's really that's kind of going back to what we were saying really even before with the whole scientific aspect of everything. You just kind of have to tune everything out, and you want to give out some of the most important information, both important scientific aspects that relate to what's going on now. For instance, we've got some cold air coming in, so we'll show like, upper level wind patterns and temperatures movements, and it gets kind of crazy if you keep showing it over and over again. If there's nothing important to show, that you kind of just have to filter that out and kind of move on forward. But you still have to show the important aspects of the weather. You can just say, hey, it's going to be cold, so get your jackets ready. But it's different if you can add that little extra tint to it with just enough information where it feels like you're kind of teaching someone, while also keeping out all the rest of that garbage, equations and all this and that and the other thing. But so it's and my actual news director told me about the whole gatekeeping thing, and how we're welcoming people in, and then we're letting them go for when we go into commercial breaks and everything. So it's like we've got the information, but what's the most important thing? And then people, you'll get other political analysts and everything, and they choose to, and they take gatekeeping to the extreme, where you're not even looking at the gate, you're looking at the inside of information through a barbed wire fence, because they're only letting you see what they want you to see, rather than actually letting you into the gate to do and everything. And that's really what's kind of harmful, and when it comes to journalism and everything, which is why I'm glad I am not a political analyst.
Yes, that's a very tough gig, no matter where on the political spectrum you sit or where in the world you may be doing that work from. No one, in my mind, can win at that kind of game, unfortunately, which is kind of sad, because political journalism I find fascinating and I really enjoy, but I don't think I can handle that abuse for or that alleged abuse for just doing my job.
Yeah, you can't. You think it's bad enough with clothing. You become a political analyst.
Yeah.
That everyone's going to be on you, because every opposite side, every side who opposes you is going to come after you like pitchforks and torches.
Yeah, it's very hard. But looking towards the future, obviously you're a meteorologist, and as you said before, you can't make predictions more than 7 days in advance. But what are you hoping the future will look like for you?
I'm hoping that the future is going to look like. Honestly, I hope that this industry is going to last, and that's kind of a thing that a lot of people don't believe in, and they're kind of leaving the industry to go towards public relations. PR is a big kind of easy transition from journalists and anybody in news to go into, which a lot of people have been doing, just also because this industry is kind of gross. Like we've talked before, the Patricias and the Karens of the world, and even the men who are just disgusting people that just constantly harassing the women out there, and constantly trying to belittle everybody else. People are just getting kind of sick of the whole thing, and people just go into this because they like reporting on certain stories, they like the weather, so they want to go in and they want to go and do this, and then they're just kind of getting trampled by other people, which is why I just kind of laugh at all those kind of cynics, not the cynics that in the industry, but the cynics that are commenting on the people in our industry. I just kind of laugh at it and move along, because they're just who has the time to complain about their local weatherman, honestly, or their local news reporter.
Yeah.
So I feel bad for the people that are leaving the group and leaving the industry, and I hope that they all do extremely well with whatever it is they want to go to. In fact, I wouldn't have the job I have now if that didn't happen, because the guy I replaced ended up wanting to become a teacher. He just really thought that was the way he wanted to go. And you know what? He's a great guy. I haven't really talked to him a lot, but everybody talks about how great he was, and all for him. But it's just going to be more opportunities for the people that want to, like you and me, who want to kind of journalism still and stick around in the industry. And the more people that leave, the more opportunities are going to be for industry is going to just transition to something else. I think that this industry is going to survive, but just in a different way, in a different format. We're going to go more digital, more streamlined, and probably just get into social media a lot more than we are now. But hopefully for me, it's going to be back home, because I really miss my family. I miss my friends from college. They're all back home. And honestly, I've traveled around the country. I was in Pennsylvania for school. I road trip to Wyoming. That was where I first worked. Wyoming, big culture shock. A lot of people don't even believe that Wyoming's even real. It's a tiny little place, and And then I ended up coming here. So I've moved around the country enough. I've seen enough of the country. I want to go back home, and that's pretty much where I hope to be. Kind of just become a chief meteorologist back in my home state. Where my friends and family are, and just kind of live out my days there in this industry that would hopefully change to kind of stay surviving.
Yeah. That sounds awesome. And it's interesting you made that comment. There are a lot of people exiting the industry. I know I was told that I couldn't get a job, or wouldn't be able to get a job in journalism. There's no jobs in journalism. You see stories about them cutting newsrooms. In fact, I don't know whether you probably have heard of Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
He owns all the newspapers here in my state, here in Australia. And the newsrooms are shutting down left, right, and center. But that also means that there are other people leaving, really, really good positions, or even like really decent positions in other parts, and it opens up so many doors. And working regional, I think, is definitely a real awesome as well.
Yeah, actually, I was a casualty of one of those newsroom kind of things because in Wyoming we ended up getting bought out by a company who really didn't know what they were doing. They claimed to, but they ended up cutting all the things that made the station that they bought so successful. They started cutting the sports, which you never cut sports in Wyoming. That's pretty much all that they have out there. There's really not much else to do since all these towns are so far apart from each other. You can't really kind of coalesce or do stuff like that. And they have events and everything they'd like to do, but they love their sports, especially their rodeo. And cutting sports in Wyoming is like cutting football in the South. You just don't do it. And they did it immediately. So and then they started cutting everything else. And I don't know if you've seen the Avengers, but they actually like basically Thanos snapped half the entire news
Yeah.
team out. I was one of them. And then they ended up just like kind of outsourcing all the news to some station, or not station, but like some company out of Michigan that had like a bunch of kind of anchors kind of scattered to the winds, and they were just kind of outsourcing everything. And that's not what people want, at local news. Local people, like, if you're going to have a local news station, you have to make it local. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're just going to watch like a national show, like Good Morning America, or like News Now or whatever, News Nation with WGN or whatever. If you're gonna if you're gonna cut out the local news, then it's no different than just watching national news, because then you're gonna have no reporters. You're gonna have barely anything that people actually want to know what's going on in their community. The weather itself, the person who's doing the weather isn't even in the place that the weather's happening, so they're not going to help you with severe weather and everything. So honestly, basically, they've driven that whole station into the ground. You know
Yeah.
what? Good on them for wasting the money that they spent, and I hope that they all end up failing. But that's just the pettiness in me.
Yes, no, there's definitely a pettiness when you get let go and you go, oh, I really hope that doesn't work out now. It's interesting though, speaking of, cutting newsrooms and that, our national broadcaster, so basically the equivalent of PBS, but on the scale of your NBC, our Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is partially government owned, has really made like some really great strides in like working in social media and investing in the local community, and like almost being that local voice that you don't see as much because the newsrooms are a lot smaller nowadays. And it's amazing to see, and I do think that there is a point where we might get to like a critical point and just turn around and head back in the direction we came, and get a lot better. So I don't know. I'm optimistic, so I still hold out hope.
I'm gonna say this, and I know it's gonna sound kind of weird. I'm not really kind of weird, but let's kind of, like, oh, of course he'd say that. He's in the industry, but there is always a need for local news, always a need,
Always,
and
yes.
especially for local weather as well, especially when severe stuff comes through. And not everyone's gonna watch, but honestly, people should at least know, especially if hurricanes come through, or you've got tornadoes in the area. Because if not, then you're going to just hear the sirens, but you're not going to know where it is, if you need to go underground, if you need to do something different or anything.
Yeah.
So this there's always going to be a need for local everything, especially because the community. I really think that local news helps bridge the entire community together. And a thing that most people don't really understand is that yeah, your CNN, your Fox News, your everything, all your major networks, at least in America, they're
Hmm.
going to have your bias, of course, especially Fox News, CNN. They're going to have their
Yeah.
biases. Um, but local news isn't biased. I mean, like, yeah, you're going to get some biased journalists and some biased anchors, and every anchor is going to have
Mm.
their own like affiliations with things. But the thing that people forget about is, and the people that always, when people are screaming fake news and they're angry about media in general, it's the big media companies that you really gotta hate, and not the local ones, because local ones, while they're affiliates to the big ones, they're just their own thing. Most of the time they are just reflections of their own community, because a lot of the times they're just built with people that, the people that are producing the shows and directing the shows and kind of just on the production side, they're from your community. Your anchors are going to be from all over the place, and
Yeah.
your weather people are going to be all from, but they're still going to be influenced by the people that are from your community. And if your community is maybe leaning more Republican, then chances are your local news and that local station will be more Republican leaning. If you're
Hmm.
more of a liberal leaning area, then it's probably going to be that. I mean, so just because a Fox station or a local Fox station is of course Fox doesn't mean that they're going to be more
Yeah.
conservative or more Republican. It's just kind of a byproduct of the area, which is why local news is so important and why most people should get their news from the local. Now, granted, a lot of these kind of places, especially in smaller markets, they don't have reporters enough to have stories from local news to fill the entire 30 minutes or however long this show is. That it's going to end up having and filling in with national news from the national affiliates. So you're going to end up getting a Fox News story made
Yeah.
by Fox News anchors and Fox News reporters put into your local thing. So of course they're going to end up showing those biases as well. But I would say the majority of things are just byproducts of the local area, and
Hmm.
and people really still get angry at their local news organizations for things that are really not even their things. You'll air a package about you know anti this president or anti that president,
Yeah.
and people will be like, "How dare you say that about our people? How dare you be so liberal? How dare you be so conservative, being anti that?" And it's like, we're not. We aired that story. We don't believe that story, but we
Yeah.
aired it because it's still important information that needs to be used. And majority of the time, things are unbiased, at least from what I've seen. But
Hmm.
you're always going to have a little bit of bias in everything, and that's really what the problem is going to end up being. And it's really what's dividing things. But you should still trust your local news. If there's any news organization you can trust, I would say it's local news,
Oh,
not so much
100%.
national news. But yeah,
Yeah. I definitely echo that. Like the work that I've done in journalism so far, um, admittedly, it is at a very local like news station, but I've watched my friends go into our large commercial stations here, and just be completely disconnected. They're great journalists. There's no credit on them, but they just completely disconnect from the stories that really, really matter to the local community, and understanding and reading a local community and going, this is what they need. This is the kind of stories that they're passionate about. And it's great to see that it's not just here in Australia, it's around the world, and that local journalism is improving the lives of other people. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being on the podcast. I've enjoyed every second of this, and I reckon you and I could speak for hours on end about
absolutely, probably.
about so many things. But thank you so much for being on. Uh, where can people find you on the internet, or are you really on the internet?
Yeah, I am. I am on the internet. I really don't do a whole lot of posting. I'm trying to get actually better at social media myself. But I am. I'm in Twitter at Ryan Gold WX, and that's the same for Facebook, also at Ryan Gold WX. Um, And that's pretty much just I only have a Facebook and a Twitter. I really haven't gotten into Instagram for like professional aspects. But yeah, it was great talking to you as well, Sam. Love chatting, of course, especially about the industry. There's a lot of
Yeah.
different things and different aspects to see, and especially Australia. I haven't known any about that stuff, so that's pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
It's quite fascinating over here. Yeah, I was chatting to a professor who's worked in the UK, Australian journalist, but worked in the UK for a while, and she made the comment to me that we would think that the UK, the US, and Australia would be fairly similar, but boy, howdy, are we so different in
Oh
the way that
yeah.
we do these things. You can find me on the internet on TikTok and Instagram at sam.the.journalist, and on Twitter, because Twitter hates usernames, at samobjournalist. One day, Twitter will get around and understand how usernames work, and I think everyone will be happier for it. Has there been anything that you've been watching, reading, listening to that you want to share with our listeners?
Honestly, The Witcher. I used to play the video game. The show on Netflix, absolutely phenomenal. The books, they're even better. Honestly, if you love fantasy and you need a new Game of Thrones after season 8 broke your heart, Witcher is definitely the place to go to. I highly recommend it. Both the video games, everything, Netflix and the books, they're fantastic.
Wow. I've definitely heard people recommending it, but I've never heard, I've never quite understood what it's about. But now that you explained it, I definitely gonna have to go check it out.
Yeah.
I'm going to plug. She's on TikTok and I think on Instagram. Emily Bear. It'll be properly linked in the show notes, but she is a jazz pianist who was most notably famous for playing on the Ellen Show, playing the piano on the Ellen Show as like a child prodigy. But she recently, she's gone and studied at Juilliard, which is a very famous music school, and gotten into composing. And she and her friend Abigail Barlow have just released a concept album for Bridgerton the musical. So if you saw Bridgerton on Netflix, it's all based on that, and it is awesome. I have not stopped playing it on repeat. I play trombone. I live in quite a musical family, and just the music is amazing. And it would be my dream. I don't know how realistic it would be, but it would definitely be my dream to watch a musical like that. And it was just awesome. But yeah, that's on all good streaming services. So if you're listening on Spotify, go search it up now. And I highly recommend you listen after this.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for jumping on. You've been an amazing guest, and I'm going to have you back on again sometime so we can chat some more.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was a pleasure for sure. Talking about everything news, it's general. It's fantastic, honestly.
Awesome.
Talk about it forever.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Content and Capable. You can follow the podcast socials at Content, the letter N, Capable on Instagram and Twitter. You can send a super boring email to us through contentandcapablepod@gmail.com. The art was done by Opia. You can follow them on opia_art on Instagram. Opia is spelled OPIA. Feel free to message them about making art for your project. Our music was written, recorded, and edited by Nora Strauss-Reeds. You can find Nora at Kane_I, that's I as in the body part, on Instagram and Twitter. Feel free to message her about making music for your project or editing your podcast. I'm proud to be a part of the Movie Night Crew Network, which features the Restricted section, a chapter-by-chapter Harry Potter pod with lots of spoilers all the time, the Movie Night Crew. Join some friends as they react to some terrible, some meh, and some really great movies. Of the Eldest Gods, a chapter-by-chapter Rick Riordan pod full of myths and legends. My Cabbages, an Avatar podcast that follows the true hero of Avatar The Last Airbender, the Cabbage Cart Guy. And Fandom's Gone Wrong, a show that discusses all things fandoms.
Hello, you awesome nerds out there. Yes, you. Have I got the podcast for you?
We've got pop culture, swearing, and all the immature jokes you could ask for.
We'll take you on a journey through TV shows, movies, books, and maybe a video game someday.
And we'll tell you how they all went wrong.
I'm Charlie,
And I'm Carrie.
and this is Fandom's Gone Wrong.
New episodes every other Wednesday wherever you get your podcasts.
Content and Capable is a podcast all about answering the question, how do you adult? Don't forget to rate and review it on your favourite podcatcher, and I will see you next Monday for another episode.
That movie sucked.
I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.